Are Man United actually getting any better? And if not, what's going wrong? And will Ugarte actually fix any of these problems? To answer these questions, we're going to go to the tactics board to understand how Erik Ten Hag wants United to play and why it's not going his way on the pitch. And at the end of the video, we're going to see how the Uruguayan fits into the system and whether or not that new signing will make Man United any better. This is how Man United set up, and in order to understand, well, what's going wrong at United, we need to understand how they play, press and build up. Now, against Brighton at the weekend and the weekend before that, Man United started in a 4-2-3-1 with Onana in goal, Dalot at left back, Martinez and Maguire make up the centre-back partnership, a new right-back in Mazraoui, a double pivot of Mainu Casemiro. On the left, we have Rashford. In the hole, we have Mount, and then at right mid, we have Amad Diallo, and making up the centre forward for now, we have Bruno Fernandes. But of course, that's not how football teams actually set up. So to begin with, we're going to see how they build up from the back to progress through the thirds. A lot in this video, we're going to be talking about units, groups of players that operate differently to how Man United want to function in different parts of the pitch. So for the build-up phase, we're going to be focusing on these 7 players and how Man United want to progress the ball from their own penalty area through the thirds and create attacking moments. So when Man United are in their own penalty box or wanting to build out through this section of the pitch, they'll split their centre-backs fairly wide and allow Onana to come as a sort of back 3, which we often see in a lot of teams, and their fullbacks will push really high, quite wide as well, at the sides of the pitch. And they do something really interesting with the double pivot, which is what we're going to focus on. Rather than having a flat double pivot that we'll see with a lot of teams, and suddenly we're seeing this 3-2 formation that we see throughout the Premier League, what I'll actually do is quite simply just stagger these 2 players. And this actually is quite smart and gives Man United a lot of advantages. One of your advantages of staggering your double pivot is simply down to, well, how do the opposition mark you? When the 2 midfielders are on the same plane, we'll often see a player just be able to split the 2 and deal with them fairly easily. Nothing's easy in the Premier League. You'll often see a similar thing high up on the other end of the pitch when a centre forward will split the 2 centre backs to stop those lateral passes across the back line. And we're seeing a similar thing here because oftentimes these 2 players are fairly close in distance to create smaller passing lanes and things like that to, not risk losing the ball. It allows for this player to shadow mark one player while still having enough distance to press the second midfielder. But by staggering these 2 players, simply by creating a little bit of distance and a little bit more verticality, now a player that stands in between these 2 players is sort of lost in no man's land. He's not really dealing with this deeper midfielder here. And he's sort of allowing another midfielder to be over his shoulder higher up the pitch, and it's a lot harder to deal with. So we can't really stand in between, and it forces the opposition to pick. Well, do you want to press a deeper midfielder if you want to win the ball higher up the pitch? Or do you want to be slightly more conservative because you've got this man higher up here, be more conservative, sit lower, deeper into the pitch, but then you can allow the progression in this part of the field and potentially move your team backwards. So you're creating problems for your opposition by simply staggering and creating a little bit of distance between your 2 players here. But that's not the only advantage of staggering your 2 midfielders. Actually, by doing this, suddenly already we're seeing passing angles that Man United can utilize to be able to build throughout the pitch. So oftentimes it'll be Onana who would start with the ball. He may pass it to a centre-back or maybe Mainu, who's come deep. And suddenly this ball can be passed out and we can progress up the pitch this way. Or it can be passed into the double pivot to a centre-back, and suddenly we're now reaching a midfielder that's progressed higher up the pitch, and we can start almost a transitional moment. Oftentimes when these 2 players, when they're on the same plane, are passing it back towards their own goal, back to where they're facing. By simply staggering these 2 midfielders, you can create angles that allow the player to receive the ball on the half turn, and then they can progress. Earlier in the video, we spoke about units, groups of players, and we were focusing on these players here and how they build in their own half. But the problem with these two units is they're not particularly connected. Too often, Man United are unable to connect these two units to create attacking moments and to be able to create consistent goal scoring opportunities from starting in their own penalty box. Too often I see a player like Onana, who's been trusted with the ball at his feet, who is good with the ball at his feet, play these over the top balls to a fullback or try and reach Rashford. It doesn't matter how good of a shape you have here. If you're playing the ball 70 yards to a Rashford who's now isolated over here, these two units are simply unconnected and the ball can get lost. And same goes for the fullbacks. I said earlier, I like how these fullbacks are really wide. They're stretching the pitch. There's a fine line between stretching the pitch and becoming isolated on the edges of it. If this ball through Onana goes through players and ends up at Dalot, suddenly these players can transition and create a smaller pitch over here where Dalot has a lot of help. It's about creating smaller pitches to build throughout the field so that we can get the ball protected up the pitch. If you're playing a long ball over here to an isolated fullback, you've got no one else to help him. You can play a long ball. A long ball is perfectly fine, but we need to make sure that we have the players around that second ball to create that smaller pitch, not simply trying to rush the build-up, which I see Onana doing far too often. So we've looked at how Man United want to build up, and now we're going to see how they press. And once again, we're talking about units. We're going to focus on these 6 here just for a second, but it is closely linked to these 4 here and how these units just don't seem to be matching. Man United want to press in a sort of, I believe it's a hybrid of a 4-4-2 and a 4-2-4, because oftentimes a 4-4-2 will have really close distances between the two lines of 4, and this shape can be used higher up the pitch but more oftentimes really low defending your penalty box. It's become super effective and teams like Arsenal and City have used it really well, and Unai Emery as well. What Man United actually are doing in their 4-4-2 is the distances are far more wider than what we see oftentimes, and it does create these two units like I just said. But the hybrid comes from these two wingers here and how they jump into the first line of the press. These two wingers here are constantly having to make the decision about when do they potentially leave a player free that's maybe just playing on the shoulder of them. When do they leave that player and jump to the last line and press? Because they don't have the confidence or the almost muscle memory that when they do jump, that their respective fullback or centre-back is going to jump with them and press that player. Rashford is having to make the decision of, well, if I'm going to jump and press, the distance here is far too large for them to create any sort of effective pressure on that midfielder. How deep Man United's last line is creating so many issues, but the problem is it's been happening for over a year that it is coached. This last line is standing exactly where they're supposed to be under Erik Ten Hag's instructions, but it's causing them so many issues because the likes of Rashford and Amad Diallo aren't able to manage the distances that they're having to manage through here and through here. The ball gets passed through their press, and teams time and time again are being able to exploit this area in behind the two midfielders here. And Man United are on the back foot and running towards their own goal with the opposition counter-attacking them. Oftentimes, coaching football is being able to help players make decisions quickly and confidently in a high-speed game. But you're causing your centre-backs to create a huge decision of committing to a deep line while making Martinez and Maguire make decisions about when they jump to these free players in the pocket. The problem is again, distances. He's often late to pressing them. Oftentimes, once the ball is played through this unit, players are quick. They can pass that ball off to another teammate, and this pressure is lost. And suddenly we now have a 3 with a centre-back out of position, out of their back line. It's a huge issue that, to be honest with you, isn't getting any better. But that is where Manuel Ugarte comes in. And I think this is the solution to this issue. Manuel Ugarte is a destroyer. He's a tackle beast, right? He will win you the ball back. But the problem is he won't particularly help you in the build-up. His progressive passes are really low. His pass completion rate is high. He is a high volume passer, but in terms of progressing the ball forward and being able to play in tight areas, that isn't the Uruguayan's game. This is what I think Ugarte is being brought in for. Ugarte is going to play as these two midfielders here. I think what Man United want to do is they're so adamant on winning the ball back in this part of the pitch. Buying Ugarte is doubling down that these six are going to win the ball high up the pitch. And if the ball gets past these six, we failed. That's the risk that you're taking. The risk that you take when you build out from the back. You don't stop building out from the back because you lose the ball because your centre-back panicked on the ball. You continue training that muscle so that you can become more and more confident building from deep areas. And I think that's what Man United are trying to do. I think bringing Ugarte is trying to add some confidence in winning the ball back really high up the pitch. So it's really up to you. Do you think Manuel Ugarte doubling down on the chasm in the centre of the pitch because they're so confident that they can win the ball back with this unit, do you think that makes Man United better? Or is Manuel Ugarte actually going to make Man United worse when he cannot progress the ball in deep areas? And they've wasted money on a destroyer higher up the pitch when they simply cannot stop the flow in behind the Uruguayan. Well, let me know. What do you think Manuel Ugarte brings this Man United team? Have I got Erik Ten Hag's tactics wrong? Can you see holes or differences as to what I've explained as to why actually the Dutchman is far more smarter than me? I guess he probably is. Thank you guys very much for watching. Let me know what you think down in the comments below, and we'll see how Man United get on.